Today we are joined in a special session for the SASI Security Review's electronic as well as digital campaign on the upcoming issue. We are very lucky that this afternoon we are interviewing somebody who is going to impact not only history in South Asia but will also impact international security. But before I go to our special guest, let me introduce to you my colleague Faria Adris, who would be joining me today in today's interview. And now let's come to the special person who is joining us this afternoon. We are very lucky that this afternoon we are joined by the President of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, Dr. Arif Alvi, who will be talking to us on a subject of great importance, that is Hindutva. Mr. President, thank you so much for giving us this time and this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving us time for SSR, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Mr. President, as you understand that you have been a great proponent of security and peace in this region. But as you also understand that we are right now faced with an issue which is not only gripping international attention, but has definitely occupied Pakistan's attention. That is the issue as well as the dispute of Kashmir. And in this regard, what has happened on 5th of August 2019 to the Reorganization Bill of Jammu and Kashmir, in addition to that, the Citizen Amendment Act, we see that the rights of Kashmiris have been eliminated. And this is not something which is just limited to Kashmir, but it's also been limited to the Muslims of India. So this, Mr. President, the question has come that this has not happened as a result of some fringe group saying this or some extraordinary event bringing this fateful consequence to the people of Kashmir, but this has happened through the Parliament of India. And this is through the parliamentary discourse and through parliamentary action that we have witnessed such dark days in Kashmir. So, Mr. President, what do you think will be the fate of bridging bridges between India and Pakistan, or for that matter in this region, when the entire parliamentary process of India is under the shadow of Hindutva?
I think the history of India is being rewritten by India itself. They want to exclude the Muslim contribution. They want to, in fact, isolate the Muslim era of 400 years and to label that era as something which was very bad for India or for the Hindu religion itself, not realizing the fact that if you read a lot of books, in fact, William Dalrymple talks about the fact that India was very prosperous. In fact, India was so prosperous that in one chapter, he mentions the fact that the British ambassador who was sent to India, it took him 3 years to meet Emperor Jahangir because of the fact that India was a very prosperous country, exporting silk, exporting textiles. So what has happened is that all that era has been wiped out in the minds of Indians. They have rewritten the textbooks. So when we talk about Kashmir, it is not Kashmir alone. It is the momentum of whatever has been happening in India, which has been anti-Muslim, which has been anti-minorities, not only Muslims, but all minorities. In fact, there was some Christian conversion in some villages, and there was a severe reaction. Centers. There was a severe reaction to that. So there was an Arya Samaj situation by one of the Hindu Mahasabhai or in the late 19th century, and he talked about the Arya Samaj and taking pride in the fact that the Arya Samaj, the Hindu culture, the religious Hindu culture is important. But then came some writings from Savarkar in 1923, and he talked about Hindutva, and he specifically pointed out 3 or 4 things in which he wanted the commitment of Hindus to a fatherland of India, the motherland of India, at the same time the religion of India. So from there the Hindutva momentum starts, and then different people led this in different manner, but ultimately the RSS, which came into being, in fact, in 2 or 3 years later after Savarkar, the RSS had very important members. In fact, once in the year 2000, they had about 1 million members, and Advani was a member, Modi was a member, You can pick up the big names of Indian politics today who are members of the RSS. RSS was a violent organization, and the founders of RSS were those like Govalkar and those who appreciated Hitler's role rather than depreciated Hitler's role, and they thought that kind of a reaction, as far as nationalism is concerned, should be invigorated in India. Ultimately, the continuous push towards a Hinduization of India led to what has happened in India against the Muslims and against all minorities, and of course a reflection of the same thing is happening in Kashmir. So I read this book by Khushwant Singh, The End of India, and I must quote you a very important part of that. And he says, and unless a miracle saves us, this was written in 2002, and he says, India is going to the dogs. That's his introductory chapter. And unless a miracle saves us, the country will break up, but not by Pakistan or any other foreign power which will destroy us. We will commit harakari. We will destroy India ourselves. So India, when it was formed, it was more of a secular propagation. In fact, one of the Indian presidents, Rajendra Prasad, was going to inaugurate a temple in Banaras. Nehru asked him not to, because he said that secular India means that the government of India will be the same for all religions. That is an old story now, because things have changed.
Precisely, Mr.
And
President.
this, you know, if you look at international history, what happens that there are the countries which make progress throughout, say, looking at countries from the 14th century onwards, the countries which make progress have inclusive institutions, not extractive and exploiting institutions. So, for example, the Industrial Revolution was taken advantage of by England because it had become gradually moved from an extractive society to an inclusive society, which meant inclusive economy and inclusive politics. So India is going in the reverse direction. India, from an inclusive political and economic structure, it was never an inclusive economic structure. The Dalits and the Muslims and the minorities were always a deprived class. In fact,
they're even referred as scheduled classes in the Indian Constitution,
yes,
let alone politically registered for their role.
And all commissions which were formed in India to look at the minorities class, all commissions found that there was a bias against them, institutional and society bias against the minorities. So you have a Muslim population which, according to Indian estimates, may be about 13 to 15%, but you have almost only 1 or 2% representation in the parliament. So there is no reflection. In the economy, they're further poor. You see, M.J. Akbar, who was a journalist and who was a politician, he's a politician in India, and who was in the Congress, but now in 2016 he went into BJP. When he wrote Riots After Riots and the Anatomy of Riots, very interesting history of what has been happening in India. Every riot reduce the Muslim economic stake in society. Every riot, it takes 15-20 years for a family to put up a shop, but it takes about 10 days to destroy it completely and isolate that person and his family. So the deprivation in India, so what I am saying is in India, economic inclusion was never there. There was a semblance of political inclusion, where Abul Kalam Azad talked about the fact that the Muslims in India, we will get stronger and we will amalgamate into society. That was a dream. It actually never came through. You may have isolated incidents, one president of India being a Muslim or some ministers being Muslims, but incorporation of the entire society never happened.
I think you raised a very important point, because even right now under the BJP government, they don't even have one single Muslim representative which fought under the political tutelage.
Imagine, how can that happen? So what is happening is, what I am saying is, this is a decay in India. This is a consistent decay. And what Pakistan has learned over the last 30 or 40 years, when we went through polarization, we went through terrorism, we saw that society can be broken apart. Pakistan had the bitter lesson of what was done by India as far as East Pakistan was concerned. We learned from that also, and we learned from recent 3 or 4 decades of our own history. India, what pitfalls we've come through, India is falling into the same. And it is going to be tremendously damaging. If you look at the Sikh or the Punjab farmer protest today, it's a reflection that the government of India today is so much Hindutva that it does not really care about other aspects where there are other concerns. And the Citizenship Act, of course,
Yes.
the fact that
NRC
there was a
as well.
registration act in Assam.
Yes, and it's now spread all over India for all
Yes.
Muslims.
And on the sidelines of Baku, I met Her Excellency Sheikh Hasina Wajid, and we talked about the registration of Assam Act. At that stage, she felt that it will not affect the Muslims too much. But actually it did finally.
After the CAA.
Yes, and it affects the Bengali Muslims much more than any other Muslim, the registration of Assam Act. So all these efforts, you see, if the lead towards genocide, or when you isolate populations and then you go to genocide, happens through these measures where in society they're criminalized, they're isolated, their living is limited to certain areas. In fact, if you go back to Germany, in Berlin, the Jews were made to stay in an area which was 3 kilometers long, only 10 feet wide. Only 10 feet wide and 3 kilometers long. And thousands of Jews stayed in that area, and that was called the slum of Berlin, and nobody was allowed to go. People were allowed to go out who were registered, and no Jew was allowed to live outside that. So that kind of isolation in communities has always has been happening in India. If you go to Delhi, around the Jame Masjid, there is this community of Muslims where the streets are not wide enough for a car even to go. And they feel secure in that, because they know that if the Indian forces come to brutalize them, they will be at least protected by their own people. So Indian society is actually falling apart. I don't know. And there are no signs, very good authors, like I mentioned, M.J. Akbar wrote Riots Upon Riots, and a very comprehensive book on riots upon riots. The fact that Rana Ayyub, a social media activist who talks about Muslims in India, she wrote on the Gujarat files because she suffered, her family members were killed during the Gujarat riots, and she talks about the fact that the way the commissions were appointed, the way the Gujarat riots were dissected, the actual promise was made to them that don't worry, in 2 or 3 years we'll change the judiciary. All those who were in jail, nobody was taken to task. And this gentleman, Khushwant Singh, writes about the Sikh riots in Delhi. And he talks about the fact that all the criminals who were responsible in the Congress party leading the Sikh riots in Delhi after the killing of Indira Gandhi, all of them, every commission called them that they were innocent and they were free, and nobody was prosecuted at all. So this is a complete state a sponsor of terrorism and isolation of minorities. So what happens in Kashmir is a continuation of the same thing.
Mr. President, I'm really pleasantly surprised that you are painfully aware of what's going on in India, and you've just given a great background to it. So you seem to be aware of the situation. And you mentioned the riots, and they were Citizens Amendment Act led to riots in India, where millions of Muslims were affected. They were in detention centers. So now, as President of Pakistan, what will be the role of Pakistan? Where can we raise our voice? It is state-sponsored terrorism against minorities, and a large number of these minorities, Muslims, who are directly affected and will be affected in coming days. We don't see a stop to this atrocity. So what will be your role or Pakistan's role to stop it?
It is not a new role. It is not a new role. My father migrated from India, and he would always tell me that that when Qaid-e-Azam came to Pakistan, the Muslim League and Quaid-e-Azam personally nominated 2 people to stay back in India, to remain involved in Indian politics, to protect Muslim rights. One of them was Chaudhry Khaliq-ur-Zaman Sahab, the late Chaudhry Khaliq-ur-Zaman, who in frustration after 1 or 2 years of the formation of Pakistan migrated to Pakistan. The other gentleman was from Meerut, whose name was Nawab Ismail Khan. Nawab Ismail Khan Sahab stayed in India because Muhammad Ali Jinnah Sahab had said that the interests of the Muslims of India must be safeguarded. Pakistan did not mean that the Muslims migrate to Pakistan and we forget about the Indian Muslims. They are our blood. My uncles remained back in India. My aunts remained back in India. I have visited India very regularly until 2014 or 15. I went to India. So the concern about the Muslims of India, in fact, in the Liaquat-Nehru Pact, which happened, was that concern was shown, and Pakistan always had the right, because these are our own blood brothers. We talked about the Muslims of India. So that role is not new. That role is old. In fact, India has kept on raising walls that there can be no discussion with Pakistan and anything inside India, only because of Kashmir. Otherwise, India wouldn't have minded. But anyhow, what I'm trying to say is that the role now left to Pakistan, number one, is that priority is Kashmir. Kashmir, and I won't go into the history of Kashmir because your listeners will be aware of that. But anyhow, we know that Kashmir should have been a part of Pakistan according to the principles of partition.
True.
In fact, Gurdaspur should have been a part of Pakistan. It was specifically carved away from Pakistan to allow India to access Kashmir. That was the mischief which happened against Pakistan. And I remember reading a book. I don't remember the author, but I'll remember the author also in a few minutes. Probably Justice Munir wrote a book, From Jinnah to Zia. And in that he talked about the fact that when the Sir Zafrullah, who was a member of the Boundary Commission, and some other members came to Quaid-e-Azam and they said that the boundary as is being defined is very much against Pakistan's interest. That the small part of India which linked India to Assam on the north of East Pakistan, yes, below Nepal, was a Muslim-dominated area, but it was given to India just to give access. Similarly, the Gurdaspur issue was brought to Quaid-e-Azam by Sir Zafrullah Khan, and Quaid-e-Azam said that I want Pakistan at any cost. Those were the words quoted in the book. And if we delay it, there might be more mischief. So we want Pakistan at any cost. What happened? That mischief is being played against Pakistan all the time. Pakistan talks about what was settled according to United Nations resolution between Pakistan and India and the United Nations.
And in line with the partition plan itself.
In line with the partition plan, but the decade of the 50s was a decade of hope with the United Nations. Because after the Second World War, after the collapse of the League of Nations as an organization which could not prevent the Second World War, there was hope in there. And Pakistan, therefore, was one of the first countries which accepted the United Nations intervention and accepted the ceasefire, although the liberation of Kashmir was happening, and that is why India ran to the United Nations to look for a ceasefire. So it's Pakistan's trust in international organizations, Pakistan's trust in countries which were powerful then, which are powerful now. And that is why we accepted the ceasefire. And we accepted all the United Nations resolutions. Today, India has moved away from all that. The August 5 they have sabotaged the Article 370 and 35A. And those articles actually gave precedence to Kashmir's point of view, because the Indian constitution was there, but Kashmir also had a constitution.
Upheld the principle.
Yes, Kashmir also had a constitution. We did not recognize Article 370 anyway, because Kashmir we consider as a part of Pakistan. But still, just to mention the deteriorating situation, I'm therefore referring to Article 370, what happened. So they had their own constitution. The Indian government could not impose presidential rule. They could maximum they could have a governor's rule. Two. The third was that they would have their own criminal laws. The Indian laws would not extend there. And any law which the Indian Parliament wanted to push through, which concerned Kashmir, had to be passed through the Kashmir Assembly also. So these were the four protectors of Kashmir, and this was the lollipop given to the leaders of Kashmir at that time.
Right. So one step that your government has recently taken is to give the political map of Pakistan. What is the political and strategic significance? What message did we send?
I think it is important. I think there are all these efforts which are made. Please keep in mind the people of Kashmir, the atrocities, the brutalities they're going through. You know, a population of 8 million or 9 million having 900,000 Indian troops there. So that is something which says a lot about the brutal subjugation of the Kashmiri people. It has continued, and when they abrogated 370A in its application to Kashmir and 370 and 35A, the Modi government made a statement that it is according to the wishes of the Kashmiri people, and you see change will happen. Even today, the curfew, or the remnants of the curfew, the remnants of isolation continue. It's only the social media. So Pakistan's stance, you're asking about what Pakistan should do. Pakistan's stance should be to open up. You see, the more the things open up, the world realizes what is happening. India is following an Israeli prescription of subjugation of Palestine. The same principles are being applied to Kashmir in all manners. Number one, to be able to change the laws. Number one, to change the demography of that place. Even the pellet guns and the way Indian forces have gone in to kill the Kashmiri people, in fact raping and subjugating the women also, has been very criminal, but the things have been hidden by from the world. So Pakistan had a setback, Kashmir had a setback, because all liberation activities throughout the world which were being fought by subjugated people, mostly Muslims, you know, the superpowers are not subjugated, is the smaller countries which are subjugated.
The people who are fighting for
it. All of them who are fighting for liberation or for their rights, with this, and these principles are recognized by the United Nations Charter. This was never terrorism. The right of the people under subjugation to look for liberation is a principle of the UN Charter. So, but since 9/11, what India and Israel managed to do, because they were subjugating Palestine and they were subjugating Kashmir, managed to do was focus all the attention, label all these struggles as terror. So that was a major setback. Today, see, circumstances sometimes make a major setback. What happened because of COVID-19? The Muslims were protesting, sitting on the streets of Delhi. The women were sitting on the streets of Delhi. But because of COVID, that their movement, their attraction, they were attracting world attention, that had a setback. So the entire issue went into the back burner. So Pakistan, what Pakistan can do as far as Kashmir is concerned, and for Muslims of India, I will never, Kashmir is the most important thing, but I would not forget the Muslims of India, because they are a part and parcel. Pakistan must keep on raising the voice, raising the voice of the world, try and have an echo of what to show the world what is happening. I think that's the best strategy for social media, and then work in international organizations. You see, I am disappointed as the President of Pakistan. I am disappointed, but that international organizations are more motivated by trade and money. There are financial. There is the morality carries less weight. Finance and trade carries much more weight. So the people can suffer. Then they may continue to suffer. But as long as India is a big trading partner of a country, their votes shift towards India. So what I believe the future of the world will be, and that is where the Prime Minister Imran Khan also has a role to play. When the Muslims what we call in Urdu nishat-e-thaniya. When there will be a resurgence of Muslims, I hope that international cooperation would be related more to moralities, more to human rights issues, more to people rather than just money and finance.
Mr. President, I think you've raised very important questions because it does put into question, the focus of the liberal world in terms of what principles it will uphold as we see these transformations occur. But unfortunately, I would like to draw your attention to a subject which is not only close to Pakistan, but also which Pakistan has tried to very significantly raise its concern, that is the state of Junagadh as well as the state of Kashmir. What is peculiar, just for the audience, I would say, benefit, and if you'll permit me, just to recount, what we have witnessed in Kashmir on 5th of August 2019 seems almost like a near story to what happened to the state of Junagadh after the accession of Junagadh to Pakistan. The only difference is, number one, there was an economic embargo. After that, there was the dismantlement of the civil administrative structures over there, followed by the postal service being stopped. At that time, that was the mode of communication. And following that, the economic institutions were dismantled. And then what's most interesting is that as people believed at that time that the state of Junagadh was part of Pakistan, there was a reverse migration of Muslims to the state of Junagadh, and Hindus were going out. But the Indian government used the Hindu-Muslim riots at that time and sent in their administrative service with paramilitary force to capture the state of Junagadh, and then also that the people who were living there, they were housed out, and their properties were made given to the Evacuee Trust of India. Now this seems to be in play after the Citizen Amendment Act and the Reorganization Act of 2019, where the identity of the people of Kashmir has been put into a question mark, and the question is now being raised that they have to reprove. So in that Reorganization Act, there is a very small clause, and that clause also states that since this is a Muslim majority state in Kashmir, the scheduled Hindu classes need to be brought here to equal out or to ease out the discrimination. So we fear, and there is international concern by international bodies which are looking at Kashmir, that if there is the preset of Hindu-Muslim riots which are seen in Kashmir, and they are used to re-engineer a solution in Kashmir, what do you think will be Pakistan's response?
I think this is happening already. What is happening already, according to the Article 370 and 35A, people of outside of Jammu and Kashmir could not buy land and property in Kashmir. That was one protection, not to allow change of democracy. And that was, again, like I said, the lollipop given to Sheikh Abdullah. The other thing was that the Kashmiris were given citizenship rights of India, but the residency rights of Kashmir depended on the Kashmir government. So that was the second protection. All these protections had been done away with,
yes,
and with the intent to bring a demographic change, and to say that the increase in the number of Hindus will result in more emancipation or more trade has not happened in India as far as the Muslim minorities are concerned. Has not happened. You see, the majority of Hindus, but the Muslims are further deprived because of that majority. So in Kashmir, the reverse argument cannot work.
But Mr. President, yes, there is a fear that the same clause, the same sequence of events may be unfolding in Kashmir, except that they want to push the Kashmiri Muslims to the detention centers, because now the condition which has been placed on the Kashmiris is that they must accept Indian citizenship in order to stay there, and if they fail to do so, they'll be sent to the detention centers. And since we have no swapping agreement or no swapping treaty, which is between prisoners held in India and prisoners held in Pakistan, so the question will become that what will you do of these millions of people who would be placed into these detention centers without any legal rights, without any access to legal resource, and furthermore, without any identity. They will be made identity-less.
True.
So in that case, this can be a regional catastrophe.
If you remember the Citizenship Act and the Assam Registration Act, the claimed working of that act by India was that for Hindus because you're a Hindu, you are a resident of India, you're a citizen of India. If you're a Muslim, then you'll have to show whether you had property. And imagine poor people have no property.
12 years.
Yes, they have no property. You see, to be able to say that to Indian citizens, I think 70% or 80% of Indian citizens may not remain Indian. If you ask all of them, if you ask all of them that you bring us some property documents of the last 10 or 12 years, so it's a major way of discriminating against a community by asking them certain things, which they cannot. Even your own population, your own Hindu population cannot get those documents, so your own Muslim population also cannot get those documents. So all these mischievous efforts will continue in Kashmir. The hope is that India, by its undoing of 370, has increased international consciousness of what is happening. The hope is that the incoming president of the United States, Joseph Biden, has talked about that we are watching and we are seeing, including the vice president. She has made a statement that we are watching what is happening in Kashmir. The hope is that the Organization of Islamic Countries has given a statement very recently, and I appreciate the Organization of Islamic Countries that it has been siding with the Kashmir issue consistently and continuously. The hope is, which is a very distant hope, that India itself realizes, it cannot really happen in my lifetime, that India itself realizes that there must be a solution to Kashmir. The kind of government, the kind of the conviction they have, and the history which they themselves have lived is so anti-Muslim that I can't believe the fact that they will have a change of heart. So what comes out of India is something which I don't believe can happen. But what I'm afraid of is the Muslims of India will not take all whatever is happening quietly and sustain the level of cooperation which they are doing right now. I am afraid of that. The Muslims may react, and then the blame comes back to Pakistan. So we face that situation anyway. We don't do anything, but we get blamed for whatever happens in Assam or Tripura or Nagaland. You see, the ISI gets blamed for whatever happens there. So I think the Muslims may not take this lying down. I hope there remains peace in India. I underline that because I don't wish that happens, because the tensions between Pakistan and India will further increase, because the blame would come to Pakistan for whatever is happening. But the Muslims have struggled. Muslims have been given the right from their faith to struggle, and I hope and I pray that they democratically continue to exercise that right, so that situation between Pakistan and India doesn't get worse. But that, I predict, it's a matter of months, if not years, that kind of reaction we'll see start happening.
So, Mr. President, can I ask you a straightforward question? She just explained what's going on in Junagadh. You explained what kind of Nazi-like regime it is in India at the moment, BJP-led, RSS-led government. And it seems like that possibly it is time for Pakistan now, not just to claim Jammu and Kashmir, but also Junagadh, because the atrocities are happening. They are similar. They massively, minorities are being affected. Most of them, as I said earlier, Muslims. So isn't it time to assert ourselves on?
I think the new map which Pakistan gave includes that fact. And in fact, when you talk about Junagadh, you should not forget Sardargarh and Manavadar.
So yes,
you must. These were adjoining states, princely states next to Junagadh, and I remember when these people migrated back. In fact, some of these people were my patients too. The Nawab Sahib of Junagadh and the Nawab Sahib of Sardargarh. So I remember them, and I remember the pain which they were going through, and I believe that Pakistan's statement regarding Junagadh and Manavadar has a lot of weight. I think Hyderabad is another example of what happened there, because it was a princely state led by Muslims. Of course, it had a Hindu majority. So historically, India was allowed to do take over Hyderabad itself. But again, according to the principles of partition, it could not have taken Hyderabad also, because it's a princely state, just like Jammu and Kashmir, with a majority of Muslims. When India can have that argument because it acceded to India, so it cannot have a reverse argument as far as Hyderabad was concerned.
Or Hyderabad is
So
concerned.
India, logically, India has no grounds. It's just a vicious, hegemonistic design, belligerent. I would add the word belligerent because of Indian attitudes. They have continued, they have insisted on these false arguments, and they continue to do so. But you cannot suppress people. In fact, if you look at examples throughout the world, I gave you the example of the Jewish ghettos in Germany. You could not, the Europeans could not suppress the Jewish people, despite what they did for hundreds of years, not decades. Kashmir issue is 7 decades old. In fact, it is older than that because of the Dogra Raj and because of all those subjugations. But still, the Jewish population in Europe could not never be suppressed. It's the Muslims which protected Jews when they were in Spain. It's the Muslims which gave inclusion, had inclusive governments when with Sultanate Osmania. It had inclusive governments when the Jews were included in decisions of the state. But at that time, Christian Europe was so anti-Jewish. In fact, if you look at the writings of Martin Luther, the Protestant church established on Martin Luther's writing, and all writings were anti-Jewish at that time. So the reflection came, see. So whatever Hindutva writings happened and Arya Samaj writings happened, the reflection then comes towards extremism. When people read upon those, they react by, not with arguments, they react with knives and guns and emotions. So that is what is happening in India. India is a classic case where Pakistan has been warning the world that this would lead to genocide. All the ingredients exist. The same ingredients what happened in Europe against the Jews, the same ingredients exist in India today. So Pakistan has been wise in warning what is happening. So if you look at that, what is happening in the Punjabi farmers, they're predominantly Sikh farmers. In Punjab, there are Sikh farmers predominantly. So I see this as a reflection of the flux which India is creating in itself. India is on a self-destruct mode. Like Khushwant Singh says, India will destroy itself if it doesn't look back. Arundhati Roy has been writing about Kashmir also. She has been very clear in her understanding, and she has made statements on when she came back from Kashmir. She made clear statements that Kashmir is not a part of India anymore, but a power which wants to be a superpower cannot become a superpower when it creates chaos within its own ranks.
And that's true. Mr. President, that leads to something very important which you said, and that was the faith in the international system and the faith in the United Nations. As we know that unfortunately Kashmir seems to be one of the long-standing issues on the United Nations Security Council agenda. That said, we see no progressive movement on that issue, despite the fact that in February 2019, we saw escalation, not only in the conflict dynamics, but we also saw a real possibility of war. Now, this is something which is happening on the international border, that's something happening on the line of control, and the excesses remain to be a live phenomena which the two countries are facing. Linked to this is the second question, which we think maybe you would be the best person to comment on and respond to, that most of these atrocities which are being committed against the Muslims and the Kashmiris are being done by structures of violence led and owned by the Indian armed forces and the paramilitary forces. While the United Nations doesn't seem to be moving, but we do have certain other international organizations such as the International Criminal Court. Do you think it is time right now for Pakistan to maybe raise its voice and maybe raise this issue in the International Criminal Court in terms of the crimes against humanity which are being committed against the people of Kashmir, considering that the Azad Jammu and Kashmir is also a direct purview of your office?
I think that that's a possibility where our legal minds will have to sit together and look at the possibility, because we don't want something which we start and the acceptability of that may be challenged by the international court itself, criminal court itself. But that's a possibility which must be looked into, because you have to mobilize every forum where you can raise your voice, and International Criminal Court is one of those forums where a voice can be raised as far as the human rights issue in Kashmir is concerned. I think it's a possibility that has to be looked into. But I very strongly believe that Pakistan's own economic prosperity is linked with the fact that there has to be peace. Pakistan's economic prosperity is related to the fact that there is peace in Afghanistan. And in the world, the way it exists, as we stand on our own feet, our voice in the world will get bigger and stronger. So while we are looking at India, while we are looking at Kashmir, we must understand that our defenses are strong, our economy is strong. Looking at defenses, what is happening right now? India has created a confrontation with China in Ladakh and Leh on Leh issues. I am worried because India has recently acquired Mirage.
Sukhoi 30s, they have gone for the ABM systems, plus, ISR capability.
Plus in the missile technology, they're going towards BrahMos 2 or BrahMos 3. It raises my concerns because India is not a rich country, it's a poor country with close to a billion population, with millions below the poverty line, far more, a bigger number than Pakistan. But if India spends on defense, Pakistan is forced to spend on defense. And I am aware that the cooperation between which India is generating, showing China in Quad, where they have an alliance between themselves and Japan and Australia and the US. So that's the Quad for their control over the seas. And at the same time, they have a data agreement now, which has been concluded about a month ago, and which is building up on 2 or 3 previous agreements for data and information exchange.
Comcasa, Bika, which they've just signed.
Yes, Bika. So I believe that because of all this, India is dragging itself into poverty, creating unrest within itself, and it wants to drag Pakistan also along the same lines. So our economic prosperity, the fact that you get united not on the Kashmir issue alone, but we get united in building Pakistan is the main issue. It's a very important issue. On economic issues, Pakistan has withstood the first wave of COVID, and I hope we can again withstand the second wave of COVID. But if there's an economic setback, our ability to hold on to our feet in the international polity becomes weaker. So all these issues are related. First, we look at India, try to let the world know what India is. It has been against Pakistan in every forum, whether it is FATF, whether it is NSG, Nuclear Suppliers Group, and on every forum India has considered Pakistan as an enemy, while Pakistan did not consider India as an enemy. The first speech made by Imran Khan talked about the fact that we will, if India comes one step forward, we will come 2 steps forward. The first speech was an indicator for India to rethink the process of peace with Pakistan. India has refused that attempt. So things don't look good, but I am confident that the Kashmiri struggle will continue very strong. You cannot, I simply refuse to believe that you can subjugate a people. People may keep on sacrificing. There are estimates of deaths of about between 100,000 to 500,000. But that's a huge loss to a small population. Imagine, and all these are youngsters. Ye sab naujawan.
It's true.
It's a huge loss, and women have been raped. We
can't even name the atrocities which the people of Kashmir have faced in the name.
So I'm confident that Pakistan will pursue that struggle. Pakistan will ensure the fact, inshallah, that Kashmir is liberated. I want to give hope to the people of Kashmir, they must keep on telling the world what is happening. It is so important. There is a recent article which came out in the international press, which talked about how India has suppressed the people with social media, have taken telephones from them, and they have arrested them, and they want to identify people who send the real information out, and they give an understanding that if you share the names of other people, we will let you go. So that kind of things are happening to suppress information. So Pakistan's primary demand should be, at an internationally acceptable level, is to open it up to journalists. If everything is hunky-dory, open it up to the journalists. The Pakistan side of Azad Kashmir is totally open. Journalists have been taken there, journalists can go there, they can see with their own eyes the people are peaceful. Why not in illegally occupied Indian?
Mr. President, you mentioned that how India is now trying to attract United States. When Prime Minister Imran Khan was in United States of America, President Donald Trump said at that time that he was surprised to know that Kashmir is the longest unsolved issue in modern history. Again, in New York Times, there was this very heart-wrenching article about the longest lockdown in the history of mankind, which is in Kashmir. 500 days, more than that, have passed, and people are living in this lockdown. Atrocities, they don't have basic human rights, and it's going on and on. You have just mentioned your disappointment in the human rights organizations, but surely there's some role they can play. And you mentioned journalists visiting Azad Kashmir. I've personally been to LOC. I've seen the sentiment in the eyes of the public. I was there when the Prime Minister was there. He was requesting the public to hold their sentiments. You just talked about brothers living across the line. These are brothers there. How will government of Pakistan or state of Pakistan stop this sentiment? Can we stop them? I mean, for how long?
I think
can
people living under suppression will not will take their own line. They have a belief that Pakistan is working for them, Pakistan is struggling for them. But these brothers and sisters are so close in movement that you realize only 4 or 5 days ago that two sisters crossed over because there's no demarcation. The families are on this side, the families are on that side, and they were repatriated. So that means that the communication between the people exists, despite India may have erected a fence all along the border and trying to discourage all communication. I think these things will continue in the present shape. But like you mentioned, the fact that you were on the line of control and you went to see what is happening, I sent United Nations Military Observer Group in Pakistan has a good role. They have not been allowed to function freely in India. I think one of the things we can push for is the fact that these international observers group should be free to see what is happening. And this is a very valid argument that if everything is fine and it's almost 1.5 years down the road after 370, let the people see, let the world see that people are so happy with you that they want to become a part of India.
Mr. President, one very important question which is linked is the role of the Indian Supreme Court. We have seen that the Indian Supreme Court has taken a decision which has shocked the international legal community. That is the destruction, ordering and enabling the destruction of the Babri Mosque. And this is based on not sufficient legal evidence worldwide. It's based on frenzy, religious frenzy, and dogma. Now, in this situation, the real question here is that there's more than 1,500 or 2,000 years plus Muslim history in India. And the advent of Muslims has, transmitted itself in different structures, different international heritage sites. Here, the question is, will or should Pakistan take the case to the United Nations International Heritage Site for protecting Taj Mahal, the Red Fort, which are all Muslim heritage? If this is the precedence which has been set and laid down by a Hindutva-led Indian government and parliament and Indian institutions, that every sign of Muslim heritage will be destroyed, we believe that Pakistan should definitely take a case for Taj Mahal, that it should be protected as an international heritage, and Pakistan should take that course for every Muslim building.
My parents were born in UP. Taj Mahal is in UP, for example. The Muslim history Muslim history or common history of the subcontinent, we preserve the sites of Mohenjo-daro, not because of any religious intent, but just the fact that these are preservable sites. We have the greatest number of artifacts of Buddhism in Pakistan than anywhere in the world. All artifacts put together, and Pakistan's artifacts on Buddhism, the inscriptions in the Hunza Valley and in Taxila and in Mohenjo-daro. So these are heritage structures throughout the world. So therefore, Pakistan has recently made a statement, because a statement was made by, I think, either the chief minister of UP or somebody, that they were degrading Taj Mahal as an international heritage site or something which tourists would be taken to, and that created alarms in the minds of all people, not only Muslims of Pakistan, but all people, even in India, that how can, because of prejudice, a religious precedent, religious prejudice, you endanger the other side. You talked about the Supreme Court of India.
Yes.
Supreme Court of India has had a very bad history. Supreme Court of the faith placed in the Supreme Court of India, when Article 370 was being changed as far as Kashmir was concerned, there was an appeal in the Indian Supreme Court. They delayed it until it became law.
True. That is accurate.
That's what they did. On Babri Masjid, they gave a very bad statement. On Gujarat, the riots which happened in Gujarat, all the appeals which came to the Supreme Court were rejected. So Indian Supreme Court has acted in a very partisan manner.
True.
Very partisan. So there is no hope which can be put on the Indian Supreme Court on any issue, because when the verdict they gave on Babri Masjid was something which is very clear. It gives an indicator to the Muslims of India that you have no place, for example, in India, and if you come to us for any correction, we are not able to do that. So Indian Supreme Court has been very partisan. Imagine the fact, if I go back to the Indian hijacker of a plane, who hijacked the plane to Rawalpindi, and he was arrested. Justice Nurul Arifin gave a verdict, and he said that he is an Indian agent. He is not. And this entire thing was carried out to stop air links between Pakistan and East Pakistan. So but they gave a very fair verdict, but in the Indian Supreme Court, I don't expect there will be a fair verdict.
So, sir, this leads us to this attention that, do you think we should raise this issue in the United Nations, especially which protect?
I think all issues. United Nations is a forum where you burden them with all issues, because it is there are two entities responsible for what has happened, and I think we should request them that they should play a bigger role. For example, the United Kingdom has a big role in leaving the matter unsettled and confused. For the Indo-Pakistan subcontinent, they were living in a hurry. So one is that, and the two is the United Nations, which promised a solution. And I am so grateful on the merit of the situation as talked about by the Secretary General of the United Nations. When he was here, he was one of the principal people of the United Nations who spoke on merit, who spoke on reality rather than politics, who spoke in favor of the United Nations carrying out and completing the task which it picked up with its resolutions.
So another very important issue, regional issue, which is CPAC. We know it's hugely important for Pakistan. We keep on talking about that. We also know that India is doing everything to thwart our efforts for safeguarding CPAC interests. Pakistan has highlighted it in the dossier that we've given to the United Nations. But will all these developments that are happening regarding CPAC, will that result in a rethink or change in our foreign policy, not just vis-a-vis India, but vis-a-vis all those factors and elements that are aiding and helping the Modi government?
I think the new Pakistan, we've been talking about a strategically located Pakistan. We should also be talking about Pakistan as a new hub of economy, a strategic new hub of economy with links to Central Asian states, with links to China, providing the shortest route to China with the Indian Ocean providing the shortest route to all Central Asian states, including Afghanistan. So Pakistan is becoming an economic hub. Part of that economic hub is the CPEC route. Although it is a China-Pakistan economic corridor, even China and Pakistan both have welcomed international participation in that, international investment in that area. Internationally, it is a CPEC route because it was the Chinese, it has happened with Chinese help. But at the same time, we have talked to the West, we have talked to the United States that there are no concerns, there should be no concerns, because Pakistan has continued a balanced role. Pakistan has historically linked in China to the United States.
Yes.
Pakistan was the first country where China landed its airline. At the same time, the world is looking at China in a different manner. And India, of course, is playing its own role
Yes.
as a spoiler. India is acting as a spoiler in Afghanistan. India is a spoiler, acting as a spoiler in Pakistan-Chinese relationship. India is a spoiler. It wants the USS China to drift apart, because India stands to gain economically to fill up the markets which China will be isolated from. So that strategy is being pursued by India at the cost of international peace, at the cost of international trade. So Pakistan, I think Pakistan will not change its foreign policy, because this foreign policy is a balanced foreign policy. It's not a tilt in any way with anybody. Our friendship is old with China. Our friendship continues, and similarly our friendship with the United States also continues. And we believe in today's world, the Prime Minister, Mr. Imran Khan, the government of Pakistan can play a very unique role in trying to handle the misgivings between the United States and Iran as far as the JCPOA is concerned.
Yes.
And Pakistan, United States and China, Pakistan can play a very good role. And of course, even now, the role of Pakistan as far as the Muslim Ummah and blasphemy is concerned has been very positive. It has tried to show the world that you must understand issues. Today in the world, if the issue of Kashmir, the issue of blasphemy, all these require good communication strategies. The people should know what we feel. The people should know what is happening. That is the victory. More than that of bullets and guns, this is the victory of thoughts and ideas.
Well, I think, Mr. President, you've been very eloquent on that, but I'm going to ask you a bit harder question, which of course I think is on the mind of every military mind in this region. That is that international security partners, while they're building up India as a regional security bulldog, they're doing so at the expense of regional security. So the fear of India-Pakistan, China-India war still persists. The question here is, what will it take to actually remove this shadow of war from the region, which can be brought to the Indian government and the people of India, that Hindutva, a right-wing approach towards international security and national politics, is actually pushing the region towards war, and war leaves no favorites.
India has been very belligerent with its neighbors also. You pick up any, Nepal, for example, Sri Lanka. In the 90s or 80s, when I was visiting Sri Lanka frequently for tourism, I was told that if you get into a mob of any sort while you're traveling, get out and immediately shout that you're from Pakistan, because if they think you're from India, they will kill you. So that kind of situation actually happened in Sri Lanka after Rajiv Gandhi sent Indian troops into Sri Lanka. You remember that? So India on the Sri Lanka side has had poor relationships. India on the Nepal side has had poor relationships. India with Pakistan has had poor relationships. India had dismembered East Pakistan, so and in that area it had poor relationships. Even today, I don't think there's a very good relationship. I'd not like to comment, because we want Pakistan and Bangladesh to improve our relations. But India has been a belligerent neighbor. It has not been comfortable with any of its neighbors. So it is very uncomfortable with China itself. So the road which India wants to travel is not a road to peace. Pakistan has made all overtures, but they were considered as a sign of weakness. When Mr. Imran Khan talked about peace, it was considered in India as a sign of weakness. In fact, Pakistan sent Abhinandan back to India as a gesture of peace, and it was considered, in fact, some of our Pakistani politicians also degraded that issue, but I would not comment on that. But that was a gesture again trying for peace. So Pakistan has made all overtures for peace, but India wants to blame for the unrest in Kashmir to Pakistan. It can't get out of that. It does not want to blame itself. It wants to, Pakistan is a scapegoat for everything which has
But
happened.
Kashmir was never theirs.
Yeah, never theirs.
It was never theirs.
It will not be theirs.
It was never theirs.
Thank you.
Mr. President, just before we conclude, we just ask one last question.
Haan,
The question is, what is your message to the thinking elite, to the international security partners, and all those who are looking at it? Because what we have seen is that hate speech usually leads to riots, and riots lead to race relations going down, and we see partitions happening.
I think we should learn from our history, the world history. I believe that very good countries who were progressive, when they talk about race and think like in that manner, they become very retrogressive and they lead to war. Germany was a very progressive country, was a country which had enormous economic potential. It was making everything, all the industrial revolution had given Germany a huge opportunity, but then when they started talking about race, Germany went down into war, destroyed itself completely. Same thing happened in Japan. Japan, after the 1853 or so Meiji revolution, opened up to the world peacefully, trying to learn. When they started talking about racial hegemony, they became a partner to Germany, and they then were able, they had to go into a shell back. So we have seen progressive economies, secular countries for example, going back and destroying themselves in that era, in that way. I believe India is also going down that path. It is not good for India. So Pakistan, my message to the world capitals is that the human rights issue is bad. They must look at, they must not allow the region to go towards disaster or war, because we are nuclear armed countries, number one. But therefore the build up which India is going ahead with, which is an air force build up and which is a missile build up and all that, will give India a greater chance to do the same thing which it did this time. It crossed international borders for the first time since 1971. So it acted in a manner which was against the Charter of the United Nations in any way. But it got what it deserved rightly. A smaller country with less resources were able to manage them well and show to the world that if we want to defend, we'll defend it ourselves in a very good manner. But we should not be coming to the brink of because we are nuclear countries. So therefore the role of the world is there, if the world wants to pick that up. But if the world is neglectful at this stage, I think the European countries, I think EU should be made aware, I think the Security Council members should be made aware, I think the United Nations has frequently voted in this manner where it wants international peace. I think the leadership of the United Nations with the present Secretary General is in good hands, and I think if these matters continue and Pakistan continues to play its role and the Kashmiri people continue to show the world what is happening in India, I think the chance of the liberation of Kashmir will always be on the cards within a short time.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving us this time. This is certainly a talk from the heart.
Stories that matter, alternate, divergent, perspectives from the region on technology, innovation, industry, policy, terrorism and counterterrorism, doctrine and force posture, nuclear, weapons and equipment, politics, strategic forecasts, business and economics. Be the first to know. Your world, their world, our world. One world. The region speaks. SASI Security Review.